Let's get one thing straight. Most of the art we encounter serves a well-defined social function, to decorate. It fills an empty space on the wall, matches the color of the rug, provides a topic for polite dinner conversation. It is a domesticated, safe art, one that neither challenges nor disturbs us, and there is nothing wrong with that. But every now and then, a work emerges that tears up this contract of convenience, a work that isn't there to please but to haunt, a work that doesn't decorate a room, but digs a hole in your soul and settles in. Arnold Böcklin's Isle of the Dead is the undisputed queen of such works. It is a punch to the gut wrapped in velvet, a meditation on the end that, by one of history's great paradoxes, has become utterly immortal. To understand the seismic power of this painting, it is not enough to simply look at. You must have the courage to dive into its dark waters, to disembark on its rocky shore, and to walk among its silent cypresses. And that is exactly the journey we will now undertake, without the dusty jargon of academia, without the condescending frills of art criticism. We are going to have a frank, eye-to-eye conversation about why an image so profoundly melancholic, painted in a world that no longer exists, continues to be such a perfect mirror for our most intimate fears. First, we need to meet the man behind the brush. Arnold Böcklin was not an easy artist, nor a pleasant person. Born in Basel, Switzerland, in 1827, he was a strong-tempered man, stubborn as a mule, with a deep contempt for the artistic fads of his time. Picture the landscape of the latter half of the 19th century. In Paris, the center of the artistic universe, a revolution was in full swing. The Impressionist crowd, Monet, Renoir, Degas, was dynamiting the conventions of the Academy. They took their easels outdoors and set about painting modern life in all its fleeting glory. The reflections of the sun on water, the steam from trains, the dance halls, the cafes, the hustle and bustle of the bourgeoisie. It was an art of the surface, of light, of the instant. Böcklin looked at all of this with monumental disdain. He found the Impressionists superficial, mere slaves to the retina. For him, true art lay not in what the eyes saw, but in what the soul felt. While the Parisian avant-garde celebrated life, Böcklin was obsessed with death. He was a late romantic, a spirit trapped between eras, a man who found more truth in the ruins of a Roman temple than in the commotion of the Gare Saint-Lazare. He spent most of his adult life in Italy, primarily in Rome and Florence, and it was there that his artistic vision matured. He was not interested in painting the Italy of tourists. He sought the mythical Italy, the Italy of legends, of pagan gods, of dead emperors and buried secrets. He walked through ancient landscapes and saw not just hills and trees. He saw nymphs, satyrs, centaurs. He was a visionary, a man who painted the invisible, the things that simmered just beneath the skin of reality. In essence, Böcklin was one of the fathers of symbolism long before the movement was officially christened and turned into a manifesto. He didn't want to reproduce the world, he wanted to summon other ones. And death for Böcklin was not a philosophical abstraction or a poetic allegory. It was an unwanted tenant in his own home, a constant, foul, and brutal presence. He and his wife, Angela, had 14 children. Try to absorb that number. 14. Now try to absorb this one. 8 of them died in childhood or youth. Diseases that we cure today with a simple antibiotic, diphtheria, typhoid fever, cholera, were death sentences back then. He buried one child after another. Imagine the succession of small coffins, the macabre ritual repeating itself until it became an unbearable routine. This familiarity with loss, this intimate coexistence with grief, is the key to understanding his art. When Böcklin painted a funereal scene, he wasn't quoting mythology. He was reliving his own trauma. Pain was his most faithful muse. His studio in Florence was a short walk from the English cemetery, a place of melancholic beauty, filled with marble angels and somber cypress trees. It was there that he buried his daughter Maria. That cemetery was not just an inspiration. It was an extension of his own life, a garden where he cultivated his sorrow. The genesis of Isle of the Dead is a story that perfectly illustrates the fusion of the artist's personal vision with the universal need for solace. In 1880, Böcklin painted the first version of the canvas on his own impulse. It was an image that haunted him, a mental landscape he needed to exercise. He called it a painting for dreaming. One day, a young, wealthy widow named Marie Bonnard visited his studio. Her husband had recently passed away, and she was immersed in deep mourning. Upon seeing the canvas, she felt an immediate visceral connection. That silent, solemn landscape was a mirror of her state of mind. She commissioned a second version of the painting from Böcklin, but with a special request. She wanted the work to be a memorial to her late husband, something that would help her dream of him. It was at her behest that Böcklin introduced the two elements that would transform the work forever: the standing figure, wrapped in a white shroud, and the coffin. With these two additions, the dreamlike landscape gained a narrative. It ceased to be a place of abstract contemplation and became a final destination, the stage for the last crossing. One woman's pain gave one man's vision its universal purpose. What is most striking is that Böcklin did not stop there. The image possessed him. Between 1880 and 1886, he would return to the composition 5 times, painting 5 main versions, each with its own personality. This obsessive repetition was not a mere commercial exercise. It was an artist's attempt to exhaust a mystery, to capture the perfect nuance of an unspeakable emotion. The first version, now in the museum in Basel, is perhaps the darkest and most intimate. The second, made for Marie Bonnard and now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, has a slightly softer atmosphere. The third version, from 1883, would become the most famous of all. With a lighter sky and a sharper contrast between light and shadow, it was more dramatic, more cinematic, and it was this version, reproduced in countless prints, that spread throughout the world. A fourth, smaller version, painted on copper, was tragically destroyed during a bombing raid in World War II, an ironically funereal fate for a painting about death. The fifth and final version, from 1886, is the brightest of all, with an almost ethereal light, suggesting perhaps that over time the artist's vision of death had become less oppressive, more serene. Each version is a chapter in Böcklin's long conversation with the end. And the name Isle of the Dead? A stroke of genius from his art dealer Fritz Gurlitt, who understood that the poetic ambiguity of a painting for dreaming lacked the same commercial punch. The name stuck, and Böcklin's masterpiece was christened for eternity. Now let us step fully into the painting. Let the quiet envelop you. The first sensation is one of absolute silence, a silence so dense it seems to have weight and texture. The composition is of an unshakable, almost mathematical stability. The horizontal lines of the water in the boat are intersected by the vertical lines of the cypresses and cliffs. There are no unstable diagonals, no chaotic movement. Everything conveys a sense of permanence, of eternal stillness. Böcklin positions us as silent witnesses, floating somewhere in space, watching the scene unfold with an uncomfortable clarity. In the foreground, the water. But forget everything you know about how water is painted. This is not the sparkling water of the Impressionists, nor the stormy sea of the Romantics. It is a smooth, opaque surface, like liquid obsidian. It does not reflect the sky. It has no transparency. It absorbs light. It swallows sound. It is the materialization of oblivion, the river Lethe of Greek mythology, which erased the memories of the dead. This water is not a geographical element. It is a metaphysical barrier. It separates our world, the world of life, noise, and change, from that other place, the domain of silence and permanence. Gliding over this dead water is the only element that suggests movement. A small rowboat, but the movement is so slow, so deliberate, that it seems an extension of the general stillness. At the stern, the oarsman. Seen from behind, his identity is irrelevant. He is not a character, he is an archetype. He is the function, the means of transport. Our mind immediately associates him with Charon, the ferryman of souls in Greco-Roman mythology. Böcklin, a scholar immersed in classical culture, knew exactly what he was doing. He gives us a timeless version of this myth, stripped of its specific details but retaining all its symbolic power. Before the oarsman stands the figure that is the pulsating, or rather non-pulsating, heart of the work. A tall silhouette standing stiff as a statue, completely wrapped in a white shroud. Who is it? Man? Woman? We do not know, and it does not matter. This figure is the newly departed soul. Its whiteness is a silent scream in the darkness, the focal point to which our gaze is irresistibly drawn. But it is not the white of innocence or purity. It is a spectral white, the white of bones, the white of ghosts. The figure's posture is one of stoic dignity. There is no sign of fear, regret, or struggle. There is only a passive, solemn acceptance of its fate. Beside it, the coffin, also covered in a light cloth, serves as irrefutable proof of the journey's nature. We are witnessing a funeral, the loneliest and most silent of all. And then the destination, the island. It rises from the water, not as a piece of land, but as an apparition, a fortress built by nature itself to guard its dead. It is an inhospitable place, of a severe and intimidating beauty. Its cliffs of massive rock seem impenetrable, yet they curve to form a small cove, a natural harbor that seems designed to receive that one vessel. It is as if the island is waiting, as if that arrival were a cosmic, preordained event. At the center of the island, piercing the sky like dark needles, is a grove of cypress trees. Since antiquity, these trees have been the sentinels of cemeteries. Their evergreen foliage symbolizes eternal life, while their ascending shape and somber color associate them with mourning. Böcklin's cypresses are more than trees. They are living monuments, guardians of an unfathomable secret. Their green is so deep it merges with black, creating a void in the heart of the composition, a black hole of mystery. But the most chilling detail lies in the cliffs themselves. Look closely. The rock walls are perforated by dark rectangular openings resembling portals or windows. They are columbaria burial chambers carved directly into the living stone. The entire island is a vast necropolis. Böcklin blends architectural references from various funerary cultures, Roman, Etruscan, perhaps even Egyptian, to create a place that belongs to no specific era or civilization. It is the archetypal cemetery, the final resting place of all humanity. The light in the painting is another masterstroke. We do not know where it comes from. It is a crepuscular, cold light that neither warms nor truly illuminates. It sculpts the forms of the rocks, creating a dramatic play of light and shadow, the famous chiaroscuro. But here, the light serves not to reveal, but to accentuate the darkness. What exists inside those burial chambers? What happens in the heart of that cypress grove? Böcklin refuses to tell us, and it is in this refusal that the power of the work resides. He understands that the mystery of death is far more powerful than any explicit depiction of the afterlife. The color palette is the emotional soundtrack of the painting. It is restricted and somber, dominated by browns, ochres, dark greens, and the black blue of the water. They are the colors of earth, of stone, of decay, of night. The only point of chromatic dissonance is the spectral white of the soul in the coffin, a violent contrast that prevents us from looking away from the central theme. These are not the colors of the real world. They are the colors of a state of mind, chosen with the precision of a composer, selecting notes to create a funeral symphony. To fully understand where such a singular vision came from, we must immerse ourselves in the spirit of that time, the so-called fin de siècle. The end of the 19th century was an era of profound cultural schizophrenia. On one hand, it was the apotheosis of reason and progress. Science seemed to have answers for everything. Technology promised a future of comfort and prosperity. Cities exploded, railways connected the world, electricity began to banish the darkness. But beneath this facade of materialistic optimism ran a current of deep existential anxiety. Traditional religious faith was in decline, shaken by Darwin, Marx, and Nietzsche. Nietzsche's phrase, "God is dead," echoed in the hearts and minds of many. If God was dead, what gave life meaning? What happened after death? Material progress offered no answers to these questions. On the contrary, the industrialized world seemed increasingly uprooted, alienated, devoid of magic and mystery. In this spiritual vacuum, movements like symbolism flourished. Symbolist artists, poets, and writers rejected materialism and realism. They were tired of painting objective reality. They wanted to explore the vast and mysterious territory of the inner life, dreams, mythology, intuition, the subconscious. They were the precursors to psychoanalysis, the cartographers of the soul. Böcklin was one of their prophets. Isle of the Dead is, perhaps, the greatest of all symbolist manifestos. It is a landscape that cannot be found on any map, yet one that we all recognize in some dark corner of our own minds. It perfectly captures the zeitgeist of an era that felt orphaned by God, but still desperately longed for transcendence. Böcklin's work offered an alternative. It presented a vision of death stripped of Christian iconography. No angels, demons, heaven, or hell. It was a pagan, classical, almost pantheistic vision, death as a return to nature, a final rest in a place of severe beauty and eternal silence. It was a somber consolation, but for many it felt more honest and more profound than the saccharine promises of paradise. And what happened to this image after it left Böcklin's easel? It exploded. It became one of the biggest hits in art history. It was mass-reproduced in high-quality prints that made it accessible to a burgeoning middle class. In the early 20th century, it was almost impossible to enter a bourgeois home in Germany, Austria, or Switzerland and not find a copy of Isle of the Dead hanging in the living room. It became a cultural icon, a visual totem for an era obsessed with its own mortality. Its popularity was so vast that figures as diametrically opposed as Vladimir Lenin, Sigmund Freud, and the Italian poet Gabriele D'Annunzio had a reproduction of the work in their offices. This proves that the painting transcended politics and ideology, touching a universal human nerve. It gave form to a collective anxiety, but did so with such beauty and dignity that it became comforting. Its influence spread like a silent fire through other art forms. The Russian composer Sergei Rachmaninoff, upon seeing a black-and-white reproduction of the painting in Paris in 1907, felt compelled to translate that atmosphere into music. The result was his symphonic poem Isle of the Dead, one of the darkest and most powerful works in the entire orchestral repertoire. The music begins with a slow, relentless ostinato in the cellos and double basses, evoking the sound of oars stroking the water. The main melody, based on the Gregorian chant of the Dies Irae, Day of Wrath, gradually emerges, filled with an overwhelming melancholy. To listen to Rachmaninoff's music while contemplating Böcklin's painting is one of the most intense synesthetic experiences art can offer. Sound and image merge, creating a complete universe of tragic solemnity. But the legacy of Isle of the Dead has a deeply disturbing chapter, a dark stain that cannot be washed away. The painting was Adolf Hitler's favorite work of art. He saw himself as a misunderstood artist and had a very particular taste, which rejected modern art, considered degenerate, in favor of a monumental classicism and a Germanic romanticism. For Hitler, Böcklin's painting was the personification of the Nordic soul, serious, profound, heroic in its acceptance of a tragic destiny. In 1933, he purchased the third and most famous version of the work and treated it like a talisman. It accompanied him from his residence in the Alps to his bunker in Berlin. It is chilling to imagine the architect of the greatest genocide in history contemplating this image of funereal serenity while planning the deaths of millions. This appropriation by Nazism forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Art is ambiguous. A masterpiece has no morals. It can inspire a saint or console a monster. The meaning of a work of art is not locked inside it. It is projected by the person who beholds it. Fortunately, the painting's power is so primordial that it survived this toxic association and was returned to its status as a universal heritage of humanity. Besides seducing dictators, Böcklin also paved the way for the avant-garde. The Surrealists, in particular, saw him as a spiritual grandfather. Artists like Salvador Dali, with his melting clocks in desolate landscapes, and Giorgio de Chirico, with his metaphysical Italian piazzas full of shadows and silence, are direct heirs of Böcklin. He was one of the first painters to understand that the most interesting landscape is not the one outside, but the one inside. He legitimized the painting of dreams, of the irrational, of the subconscious. He created the prototype of the mental landscape, a place constructed with the logic of emotions, not the rules of physics. Without Isle of the Dead, the history of 20th century art would have undoubtedly been very different. And today, why does this somber painting by a grumpy 19th century Swiss man still capture us? Why does it continue to appear on the covers of heavy metal albums, in art films, in video games? Because it deals with the one human experience that technology cannot cure, that progress cannot eliminate, and that money cannot buy: mortality. We live in a culture that is terrified of death. We hide it, medicalize it, outsource it to professionals. We fight desperately against aging, celebrate youth as if it were eternal, and distract ourselves until the very last second to avoid thinking about the inevitable. Isle of the Dead forces us to do just that. Stop and think. It confronts us with the end, but it does so in a paradoxically beautiful way. Böcklin's island, though imposing and severe, is not a hell. It is a place of monumental peace. The silence that emanates from the canvas is not the silence of terror, but the silence of completion. The painting functions as a memento mori for a secular age. It reminds us of our finitude without resorting to threats of damnation or promises of salvation. It offers us a space for pure contemplation. Böcklin's genius was to create an image that is both an empty vessel and a powerful symbol. It is empty because it does not impose a single interpretation on us. The figure in the boat could be anyone, a loved one we have lost, a hero from an ancient legend, or most frighteningly of all, ourselves. And it is powerful because this very ambiguity allows us to project onto it our own fears, our own hopes about what lies on the other side of the veil. It is not just a painting, it is a dark mirror. What we see, reflected in its still waters, is the outline of our own soul. That is why it is immortal, because as long as there are human beings who love, who lose, and who wonder about the great silence that awaits us all, Arnold Böcklin's island will remain there, patiently waiting for the next boat to arrive.